Captured Japanese nurses stunned when Americans asked them to save lives. I watched from a few feet away as Yumi stood motionless on the battlefield, her white nurse's uniform stained with dirt and blood. The fighting had finally ceased, leaving behind an eerie silence that pressed against my ears. The acrid smell of gun prisoner of war still hung thick in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood that seemed to permeate everything. My hands trembled as I gripped the small medical bag I still carried. Like Yumi, I had been tending to the wounded until the very end. Now scattered bodies lay across the volcanic landscape of Saipan. FME, both Japanese and American soldiers who would never return home. The thought made my throat tighten. "Yumi," I whispered, moving closer to her. She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where American troops were advancing toward our position. We both knew what this meant. There was nowhere left to run, no way to escape. A few other nurses, huddled nearby, Keiko, Sachiko, and Hana. We were all that remained of our medical unit. The rest had either perished in the fighting, or I pushed away the dark thoughts of what had happened to some of our colleagues who had chosen a different fate rather than face capture. The sound of boots crunching on volcanic rock grew louder. My heart hammered against my ribs as several American soldiers appeared, their rifles trained on us. I instinctively moved closer to Yumi, our shoulders touching. We had trained together, served together, and now we would face whatever came next together. "Hands up," one of the soldiers called out in English. Though I understood the words, fear kept me frozen until Yumi slowly raised her hands. I followed her lead, as did the others. The Americans approached cautiously, their expressions a mix of wariness and, surprisingly, something that looked like concern. "They're medical staff," one soldier said to another, pointing to the Red Cross emblems on our uniforms. The soldiers lowered their rifles slightly, though they remained alert. A tall soldier stepped forward, speaking in broken Japanese. "You. Safe now. No harm." His pronunciation was terrible, but the gentle tone of his voice startled me. This wasn't the cruel enemy we had been warned about. They gestured for us to move, and we walked in a small group, surrounded by American soldiers. Yumi remained silent beside me, her face a mask of dignity despite our circumstances. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. None of us had slept properly in days. They led us to a temporary holding area where other Japanese prisoners were being gathered. To our surprise, they immediately offered us water and basic medical attention for minor injuries. One young soldier even brought us some field rations, simple combat meals, but it was the first real food we'd seen in days. Yumi sat next to me as we ate, her movements mechanical. I could sense her confusion. It mirrored my own. Everything we had been told about the Americans seemed at odds with their current behavior. The food, though basic, filled our empty stomachs. The soldier who brought it hadn't sneered or mocked us. He'd simply nodded respectfully and moved on. As night fell, we huddled together on the ground, exhausted but too anxious to sleep properly. Yumi lay beside me, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I knew her mind must be racing, trying to make sense of our situation, wondering what fate. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. I sit next to Yumi on the hard train seat, watching the unfamiliar American landscape roll past the window. My muscles ache from days of travel, but I keep my posture straight, refusing to show weakness. The steady rhythm of the train's wheels clicking against the tracks has become our constant companion. Water? An American guard offers us canteens. His voice is gentle, almost apologetic. I exchange glances with Yumi before accepting the water with a slight bow. The coolness soothes my parched throat, but the guard's kindness only deepens my unease. Everything we were taught about Americans seems to be unraveling with each passing hour. The countryside stretches endlessly, vast fields and forests so different from our homeland. Other passengers on the train stare at us with curious eyes. I notice how some of the American soldiers position themselves between us and the civilian passengers, not threateningly, but almost protectively. "Do you think they're taking us somewhere worse?" I whisper to Yumi in Japanese, careful to keep my voice low. "Perhaps this kindness is just for show?" She shakes her head slightly, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape. "I don't know anymore, Miyuki-san. Nothing is as we were told. I think back to our training, to all the stories we heard about American barbarism. Yet here we are, being offered regular meals and clean water. The Cognitive dissonance makes my head spin. I straighten my nurse's uniform, now wrinkled from days of wear, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. As we cross into Wisconsin, the landscape changes again. The summer heat seeps through the train windows, and I watch thunderclouds gather in the distance. Some of our fellow nurses doze fitfully, while others sit in rigid silence. I remain alert, studying our guards, searching for any sign that their courtesy is merely a facade. Finally, the train begins to slow. Through the window, I catch my first glimpse of Camp McCoy. My heart pounds as I take in the sight: neat rows of buildings, well-maintained grounds, and American flags fluttering in the breeze. This can't be right. Where are the harsh conditions we were warned about? We file off the train, our legs stiff from the long journey. The camp commander greets us with a formal bow, clumsy but sincere. I feel my cheeks flush with confusion at this unexpected show of respect for our customs. This way, please. A young soldier gestures toward a clean wooden building. Inside, we find simple but adequate accommodations: real beds with fresh linens, basic toiletries, even a small mirror on the wall. The American soldiers maintain a respectful distance as we inspect our new quarters. I stand in the doorway of our barracks, watching American soldiers go about their duties. There's no cruelty in their movements, no hatred in their eyes when they glance our way. Some even offer small smiles or polite nods. Perhaps we should remain cautious. I murmur to Yumi, who stands beside me. This could all change tomorrow. But even as I say the words, I feel my certainties crumbling. The reality before me refuses to align with everything I believed about our captors. I touch the Red Cross armband on my sleeve, remembering my duties as a nurse, wondering what this strange new chapter will bring. I watched as the American soldiers led us to our new quarters, my heart pounding. Despite their seemingly gentle demeanor, the barracks were simple but clean, so different from what we had steeled ourselves to expect. Through the windows, I could see the camp stretched out before us, orderly and well-maintained. It felt wrong somehow, like a trick meant to lower our guard. "What do you make of this?" I whispered to Yumi in Japanese as we were shown our bunks. She just shook her head slightly, her face unreadable as always. There were 8 of us nurses all together, and they had given us our own separate building, away from the male prisoners. The wooden floors were swept clean, the bunks had real mattresses, and there were even proper blankets folded at the foot of each bed. I ran my fingers along the rough wool, remembering the stories we'd heard about American brutality toward prisoners. Where were the chains? The armed guards? The cruel treatment we'd been warned about? Perhaps they mean to gain our trust before showing their true nature, Nurse Tanaka murmured, from the bunk beside mine. Several others nodded in agreement. "We must remain vigilant," I said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at me. "Remember our training. Remember our duty to the Emperor." Yumi had claimed a bottom bunk in the corner, where she sat perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap. I could see the conflict in her eyes as she surveyed our surroundings. We had all been taught that Americans were savage barbarians who showed no mercy, and yet, the food they gave us on the train was fresh, Nurse Yamamoto said quietly, and they haven't laid a hand on any of us. "That means nothing," I snapped, perhaps too harshly, but I couldn't bear to hear them speaking this way, as if our enemies deserved praise for basic human decency. "We are still their prisoners." A knock at the door made us all freeze. It opened to reveal a tall American officer, his uniform crisp and his manner formal but not unkind. My stomach clenched. This must be when they would finally show their true colors. "Good evening," he said in English, bowing slightly. "I'm Captain Jack Harrison, the camp's medical officer. I wanted to personally welcome you and ensure you're settling in comfortably." We stared at him in wary silence. He continued speaking, explaining something about the Geneva Convention and assuring us we would be treated with respect. I translated his words in my head, searching for hidden threats or warnings, but found none. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask," he finished, his tone genuine. "We consider you medical professionals first and foremost, not prisoners." As he turned to leave, I caught Yumi's eye across the room. Her expression mirrored my own confusion and disbelief. Could we truly trust this show of kindness? Or was it merely the calm before the storm? The door closed behind Captain Harrison, leaving us in uncertain silence. Outside, the sun was setting over the camp, casting long shadows through our windows. I touched the Red Cross, armband I still wore, thinking of all we had been taught about the enemy. Nothing had prepared us for this. We must be careful, I said finally, breaking the heavy quiet. No matter what they say or do, we cannot forget who we are. But even as I spoke the words, I felt the first crack in my certainty. I watched the American doctor, Captain Harrison, as he spoke to us in our barracks. His face showed genuine concern, something I still found difficult to reconcile with everything we'd been taught about these people. The flu outbreak had spread quickly through the camp, and now he stood before us, asking for our help. "We could use your medical expertise," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "This isn't an order. You're being asked as medical professionals." My eyes shifted to Yumi, who sat rigid beside me. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. I could see the internal struggle playing across her features, the same battle I felt raging within, myself. The other nurses around us remained silent, their faces a mix of disbelief and uncertainty. Some avoided eye contact altogether, staring at the floor or their hands. The very idea of helping our captors seemed unthinkable. Yet here we were, being asked politely for assistance. Why should we help? I found myself asking, my voice sharper than intended. "These are your soldiers, not ours." Captain Harrison nodded, as if he'd expected this response. "They're soldiers, yes, but they're also human beings who need medical care, just as you would treat any patient who needed help." His words struck something deep within me. I glanced at Yumi again, noting how her expression had softened slightly. We had both taken oaths as nurses, sworn to help those in need. But those oaths had never anticipated this situation. "We will not force anyone," Captain Harrison continued. "The choice is entirely yours, but we have many sick men, and our medical staff is overwhelmed." After he left, the barracks erupted in whispered conversations. Most of the nurses spoke in harsh, dismissive tones. "It must be a trick," one said. "They're testing our loyalty," another suggested. I watched Yumi walk to the window, her silhouette outlined against the setting sun. She hadn't spoken a word since Captain Harrison's request, but I could see the conflict in her stance, the way her shoulders tensed and relaxed as she processed her thoughts. "What do you think, Yumi?" I asked softly, moving to stand beside her. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the camp beyond our window. We could see American soldiers hurrying between buildings, many wearing masks to protect against the spread of the flu. In the distance, the medical building's lights blazed bright against the darkening sky. "I don't know what to think anymore, Miyuki," she finally whispered. "Everything we believed about them, it's all different here." The other nurses continued their heated discussion behind us, but I stayed by Yumi's side, watching as the sun sank lower on the horizon. The shadows grew longer across the camp, and still we stood there, caught between duty and loyalty, between what we'd been taught and what we were seeing with our own eyes. As darkness settled over the camp, I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on all of us. The thought of helping the enemy seemed impossible, yet the memory of our medical training, of the basic human duty to help those in need, kept surfacing in my mind. I knew Yumi was wrestling with the same thoughts, her silence speaking volumes about her internal struggle. I watched Yumi toss and turn in her bunk for the third night in a row. The moonlight streaming through our barracks window cast shadows across her troubled face. Even in sleep, she couldn't escape the weight of Captain Harrison's request. "You're still awake too, Miyuki-san?" "And," she whispered, catching me observing her. "I can't stop thinking about it either," I admitted, sitting up in my bunk. The springs creaked beneath me as I shifted. The Americans have been different than we expected. Yumi sat up as well, hugging her knees to her chest. "I keep remembering my oath as a nurse, to help those in need, regardless of who they are. They are still our enemies," I reminded her, though my words lacked the conviction they once held. The sound of coughing from the nearby medical ward drifted through our thin walls. During the day, we tried to ignore the increasing number of sick soldiers being brought to the infirmary. But at night, when everything was quiet, the sounds of their suffering were impossible to shut out. Several more nurses stirred in their bunks, unable to sleep through another night of listening to the ill soldiers. "What would our families think?" one of them whispered from across the room. "If we helped the Americans?" I saw Yumi's shoulders tense at the question. We all knew what our families would say, that we were betraying our emperor, our country, everything we held sacred, but none of us could deny the growing unease in our hearts as more soldiers fell ill. "Remember what they taught us about Americans?" Another nurse spoke up. That they were cruel monsters who would torture us if we were captured. She paused. But look how they've treated us. Clean beds, proper food, medical care when we need it. Yumi stood up suddenly, pacing the narrow space between our bunks. I could see the internal struggle written across her face. As the senior nurse among us, we often looked to her for guidance. But this decision seemed to be tearing her apart. My grandfather fought in the last war, she said softly. He always told me that honor wasn't just about loyalty to our country. It was about staying true to our principles, even in the darkest times. I watched as she stopped by the window, staring out at the lights of the medical ward. These men, they're someone's sons, brothers, husbands, just like our own, soldiers. The room fell silent as her words sank in. We'd all been trained to see the Americans as faceless enemies, but our time in the camp had slowly chipped away at that belief. The guards who brought us extra blankets when the nights got cold, the cook who made sure we had proper portions, Captain Harrison's unfailing courtesy, everything we'd been taught to believe. Over the next few days, I noticed Yumi spending more time watching the medical ward from our window. Each time another soldier was carried in, her hands would clench, as if fighting the instinct to help. Finally, on the fourth morning, she straightened her uniform with trembling fingers. "I have to do this," she announced quietly. "Not for them, but for who I am as a nurse." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, Yumi-san, we understand." With determined steps, she walked across the compound toward Captain Harrison's office. Through the window, I watched her knock on his door, her back straight and proud, despite her obvious nervousness. When she disappeared inside, I said a silent prayer for my friend, knowing she had just taken the first step down a path that would change everything. I watch from my corner of the medical ward as Yumi approaches her first American patient. The sterile walls and organized shelves are so different from the mud-splattered field hospitals we worked in back on Saipan. Everything here feels unnaturally clean, almost peaceful, but my heart still pounds with uncertainty. Private William Foster lies on the white sheets, his face flushed with fever. I notice how young he looks, probably no older than my younger brother. His dog tags catch the morning light as Yumi checks his temperature. My hands clench involuntarily. We shouldn't be here, helping these men who drove us from our home. "Ma'am," Foster croaks, his eyes glassy with fever. "Thank you for helping me." His words are simple, sincere. I see Yumi's shoulders tense for a moment before she forces herself to relax. I move closer, pretending to organize medical supplies while keeping watch. The American soldiers in their beds are different from what we expected. No shouting, no threats. Just quiet gratitude as nurses check their vitals and adjust their IVs. "Your fever is very high," Yumi tells Foster softly. Her hands are steady as she prepares a cool compress. I remember how those same hands once trembled when treating our own wounded soldiers under artillery fire. Now they move with practiced precision in this strange, quiet place. Captain Harrison passes through, nodding approval at our work. "How's our patient doing?" he asks, stopping by Foster's bed. The genuine concern in his voice makes me uncomfortable. This isn't how enemies are supposed to act. The fever hasn't broken yet. Yumi reports professionally, but his breathing is better than this morning. Foster manages a weak smile. "Doc says I got the flu pretty bad, but these nurses, they're real good at what they do." I turn away, busying myself with organizing medical supplies. His praise feels wrong, like a betrayal of everything we believed. Yet as I watch Yumi tend to him throughout the day, I see something change in her face. The rigid mask of duty softens just slightly when Foster tells her about his family back home. A wife named Sarah, 2 small children waiting for him. Other nurses move between the beds, checking temperatures, changing bandages. Some work mechanically, avoiding eye contact. Others, like Yumi, seem to be struggling with the same internal battle I feel, the conflict between our training as healers and our loyalty as soldiers. As evening approaches, exhaustion settles over the ward. I've been watching Yumi all day, noting how carefully she treats each patient, how she stops herself from showing too much kindness while still being gentle. When she finally finishes her shift, I see her pause at the door, looking back at Foster's sleeping form. The satisfaction of helping others is there. I can see it in her eyes. But there's something else too, a deep sadness that mirrors my own. We've crossed a line today. By helping these men, by seeing their humanity, We've shattered something fundamental about our understanding of who they are, who we are. I follow Yumi out of the ward as the night shift arrives. Neither of us speaks. We don't need to. The weight of what we've done, helping those we were taught to hate, sits heavy between us. And though I know we've done nothing wrong by healing the sick, I can't help but feel we've betrayed something precious in the process. From my corner of the medical ward, I watch Yumi-san as she tends to another American soldier. Her gentle hands check his temperature, and I notice how different she seems now compared to just days ago. The way she speaks softly to them, offering comfort, it makes my stomach twist with unease. "Nakamura-san," she calls to me. "Could you bring more cool cloths?" I gather the supplies, my movements precise and mechanical. The ward is filled with the sounds of labored breathing and occasional coughs. The flu has spread quickly through the camp, leaving more Americans in need of care each day. As I pass the cloths to Yumi, I catch sight of Private Foster, the soldier she seems to spend the most time with. He's awake today, propped up against his pillows. "Thank you, Miss Takahashi," he says in his peculiar American accent. His voice is weak but genuine. I watch as Yumi's expression softens slightly. She adjusts his blanket with the same care she would show one of our own. "You must rest more," she tells him firmly. "The fever will not break if you keep trying to talk." I busy myself with organizing medical supplies, but I can't help overhearing their conversation. Foster speaks of his home in Ohio, of his children, a daughter who loves to draw, and a son who's just learning to walk. His words paint pictures of a life, so ordinary, so human, that I have to remind myself he's the enemy. Throughout the day, I observe Yumi moving from bed to bed. She checks temperatures, administers medicine, and speaks quiet words of encouragement. The Americans look at her with gratitude, and something in my chest tightens. This isn't how it's supposed to be. We weren't trained for this kind of interaction with the enemy. "Their fever charts are improving," Captain Harrison says, as he enters the ward. I pretend to be absorbed in my work, but I watch him from the corner of my eye as he approaches Yumi. He carries himself differently from other American officers I've seen. There's no arrogance in his manner, just quiet authority and genuine concern for his men. "You've done remarkable work here, Miss Takahashi," he tells her. His voice is low, respectful. "These men, they wouldn't be recovering without your help." I see Yumi pause in her tasks, her hand stilling on the chart she's holding. Something flickers across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. She looks up at Harrison, and I can see the struggle in her eyes. This man, this American, is thanking her with such sincerity that it seems to shake something loose in her carefully maintained composure. She starts, then stops. Her fingers tighten on the clipboard. I am only doing what a nurse should do, but I can see it, the moment when something shifts in her understanding. The way she looks at Harrison now is different from how she looked at him days ago. The enemy she thought she knew is transforming before her eyes into something more complex, more human. I turn away, unable to watch anymore. My own hands shake slightly as I organize the medicine bottles. We were taught that Americans were barbarians, cruel and without honor. Yet here they are, showing us kindness and gratitude. Here is their captain, treating Yumi with respect she never expected to receive. I hear Yumi's soft footsteps as she moves to the next patient, but I can sense her distraction. Whatever certainties she held about our situation, about these Americans, are crumbling. And though I won't admit it aloud, I understand her confusion all too well. I watch Yumi from across the medical ward, noticing how her movements have changed over these past weeks. There's a softness to her now that wasn't there before, and it worries me. She moves between the American patients with growing ease, speaking to them in her broken English, even managing small smiles when they thank her. "Yumi-san," I call out quietly as she passes by with fresh bandages. "You should rest. You've been working since dawn." She pauses, and I see the exhaustion in her eyes. "There is still much to do, Miyuki-san." Her voice is tired but determined. The outbreak has taken its toll on all of us, but Yumi seems to carry an additional burden, one that I recognize all too well. I follow her as she makes her rounds, watching how Captain Harrison nods respectfully whenever he passes. The American officer's kindness continues to unsettle me, though not as much as it seems to affect Yumi. I see how she struggles with it, the way her hands sometimes shake when she's changing bandages, how she falls silent during our evening meals. "They are nothing like what we were told," Yumi whispers to me later, as we organize medical supplies. Her words carry the weight of betrayal, not of our country, but of the truths we once held certain. I keep thinking about what my father would say if he knew I was helping them. I place a gentle hand on her arm. We are nurses first, Yumi-san. That is what matters now. But even as I say the words, I understand her conflict. Every act of kindness from the Americans chips away at the walls we built around our hearts. The night shift arrives, and with it comes an unexpected emergency. An American soldier has been injured during a training exercise, a bad fall that left him with a deep gash and possible internal injuries. I watch as Captain Harrison specifically requests Yumi's assistance. "Nurse Takahashi," he says, his voice carrying that strange mix of authority and gentleness. "We need your expertise." Yumi follows him without hesitation, and I trail behind, ready to assist if needed. The injured soldier lies on the examination table, his face pale with pain. As Yumi begins to clean and assess his wounds, he starts to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "My little girl," he says, grimacing as Yumi works. "She just turned 6, sent me a drawing last week." He reaches weakly for his pocket, and Captain Harrison helps him retrieve a folded piece of paper. "She drew our whole family, said she's waiting for me to come home and make it complete." I watch Yumi's hands freeze for just a moment. The soldier continues talking about his family, his wife's garden, his son's baseball games, his daughter's first day of school. With each word, I see Yumi's composure crack just a little more. Her movements remain precise and professional, but I know her well enough to see how deeply the soldier's words affect her. His stories about his children remind me of the letters Yumi used to receive from her brother, filled with tales about his own young family. As we work together to treat the soldier's injuries, I notice tears gathering in the corners of Yumi's eyes. She blinks them away quickly, but I've seen them. Seen how each story this American tells strips away another layer of the enemy we were taught to hate. I watch from my corner of the medical ward as Yumi changes Private Foster's bandages. There's something different about her these days. A softness in her movements, a gentleness I haven't seen since before the war. It makes me uneasy. "My daughter Sarah just turned 6, Foster is saying, his voice still weak from the fever. "Last letter I got, my wife said she lost her first tooth. Wish I could have been there to see it." I pretend to organize medical supplies, but I can't help listening. These Americans, with their casual way of sharing personal details, it goes against everything we were taught. Yet I notice how Yumi leans in slightly, hanging on every word as she works. "And Tommy? He's only 3, Foster continues, managing a weak smile. "Betty says he's starting to look just like me. Keeps asking when Daddy's coming home." I see Yumi's hands pause for just a moment. Her face remains composed, but I know her well enough to see the emotion she's trying to hide. These stories of children waiting for their fathers, they chip away at the walls we've built around our hearts. "You must miss them very much," Yumi says softly, her English careful but clear. "We've all picked up more of their language in the weeks since we started working in the ward. Every single day," Foster replies, his voice cracking slightly. "But knowing I'll see them again, it keeps me going. I busy myself with counting bandages, but my hands are shaking. These conversations make everything more complicated. It was easier when we could think of them as faceless enemies, not fathers and husbands with families waiting for them. "You saved my life, Nurse Takahashi," Foster says suddenly, reaching out to touch Yumi's arm. I stiffen at the contact, but Yumi doesn't pull away. "I want you to know, I owe you everything. Without your care during the worst of my fever, I might never have seen my children again." The silence that follows feels heavy. I risk a glance at Yumi and see the conflict written across her face. Pride in her skill as a nurse battles with the shame of helping the enemy. Compassion wars with duty. I understand because I feel it too. This growing uncertainty about everything we once believed was absolute. I was just doing my job," Yumi finally responds, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Foster insists. "You did more than that. You showed kindness when you didn't have to. You treated me like a human being, not just another soldier." I watch as Yumi quickly gathers her supplies, her movements betraying her inner turmoil. She manages a small bow. "Free Alice. Our old habits die hard." Before hurrying from the ward, I know she'll spend hours tonight sitting on her bunk, staring at nothing, wrestling with the guilt of these growing connections. As I finish my inventory, I hear Foster humming softly, some American lullaby, probably for his children back home. The tune follows me as I leave the ward, a gentle reminder that the lines between friend and enemy aren't as clear as they once seemed. I watch Yumi from across the medical ward, my heart heavy as she mechanically goes through her duties. The change in her has been gradual but unmistakable. Where once there was fierce pride and determination, now I see confusion and turmoil in her eyes. Tonight is different, though. As she checks Private Foster's temperature for the third time in an hour, her hands begin to shake. The thermometer clatters to the floor, and Yumi stands frozen, staring at nothing. I hurry over, touching her arm gently. "Yumi-san," I whisper. "Come with me." She doesn't resist as I lead her to the small supply closet, where we sometimes take our breaks. The moment the door closes behind us, she crumples against the wall, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. "I don't know who I am anymore, Miyuki," she chokes out. "These men, they're supposed to be our enemies. We were taught they were monsters, barbarians. But Foster-san speaks of his children with such tenderness. Harrison-san treats us with respect. How can I hate them?" I settle beside her on the cold floor, our shoulders touching. The dim light from the single bulb above casts shadows across her tear-streaked face. "You feel like a traitor," I say softly. "It's not a question." "Yes," she whispers. "Every time I change their bandages, every time I ease their fever, am I betraying our homeland? Our emperor? Everything we believed in?" Her fingers twist in her lap. "Yesterday, Foster-san showed me a photograph of his daughter. She looks just like my niece, Miyuki. How can I see him as an enemy when all I see is a father who wants to go home to his child?" I remain quiet, letting her words fill the small space. The muffled sounds of the ward filter through the door, coughing, quiet conversations, the squeak of nurses' shoes on the floor. All so ordinary, yet nothing is ordinary anymore. "Sometimes," Yumi continues, her voice barely audible, "I forget we're prisoners. I forget we're at war. I just see people in pain, and my hands move to help them before I can think about sides or loyalty. What kind of Japanese woman does that make me?" The question hangs in the air between us. I think carefully before speaking. "It makes you a nurse, Yumi-san, just as you've always been." She turns to look at me, her eyes red-rimmed but searching. "But our duty is to ease suffering," I say firmly, though my own heart aches with similar doubts. "That's what we were taught, in nursing school, before they taught us about enemies and war." Yumi draws a shaky breath. "You understand then? You feel it too? The confusion? The guilt?" "Yes," I admit, feeling a weight lift as I finally speak these thoughts aloud. Every day, I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. Every kind word from them makes me question everything I thought I knew. Yumi leans her head against my shoulder, her breathing slowly steadying. We sit in silence for a long moment, two lost souls finding comfort in shared uncertainty. The war rages on somewhere beyond these walls, but in this quiet moment, we're just two nurses trying to navigate the blurring lines between duty and humanity. "Thank you, Miyuki," she whispers finally. "For listening, for understanding." I squeeze her hand gently. "We will find our way through this together." I watched from the doorway as Yumi worked tirelessly over Private Johnson's bed. His fever had spiked dangerously high during the night, and none of us thought he would make it until morning. But there she was, my fellow nurse and friend, refusing to give up on him. The morning light filtered through the infirmary windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. I could see the exhaustion in Yumi's movements, but her hands remained steady as she applied cool compresses and administered medication with practiced precision. She hadn't left his side for hours, monitoring his breathing and checking his temperature with unwavering attention. "His fever's breaking," she announced quietly, relief evident in her voice. I moved closer, noting the sheen of sweat on Private Johnson's forehead beginning to dry. His breathing had become more regular, and the alarming bluish tinge around his lips had faded. Dr. Matthews, who had been checking on other patients, hurried over to verify Yumi's assessment. After examining Johnson, he nodded approvingly. "Remarkable work, Nurse Takahashi. I honestly didn't think he'd pull through." I saw something flicker across Yumi's face, pride mingled with uncertainty. She bowed slightly, a habit we both still couldn't shake, and continued her work without comment. But I knew her well enough to see the internal struggle playing out behind her composed exterior. Later that morning, several officers visited the ward to see Johnson's improvement for themselves. They spoke in hushed tones, gesturing toward Yumi as she went about her duties. I overheard phrases like exceptional care and invaluable asset. Captain Harrison approached her as she was changing linens on an empty bed. "Nurse Takahashi," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet ward. "What you did last night was nothing short of miraculous. Private Johnson has a wife and 3 young children waiting for him back home. Thanks to you, they'll see him again." I watched Yumi's hands freeze mid-motion. She kept her eyes fixed on the bed, but I could see them glistening with unshed tears. The captain continued, "This ward, this camp, would be much worse off without you. Your dedication and skill have saved more lives than you know." When Yumi finally looked up, I saw the complex emotions warring on her face. Pride in her abilities as a nurse, satisfaction at saving a life, but also deep confusion and guilt. She was helping men who, just months ago, had been our enemies, men whose comrades had possibly killed our own soldiers. I understood her turmoil all too well. Each life we saved here felt like both a victory and a betrayal. Each word of praise from the American officers was both a comfort and a reminder of our complicated position. "Thank you, Captain," Yumi responded softly, her voice barely audible. She bowed again, deeper this time, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the fresh sheets. The captain nodded and left, but his words hung heavily in the air. Yumi remained motionless for several long moments, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. When she finally moved again, I saw a single tear roll down her cheek, quickly wiped away before anyone else could notice. I wanted to go to her, to tell her I understood, but I knew this was a battle she needed to fight within herself. The recognition she'd received was well-deserved, but it had also forced her to confront the reality of our situation in a way she couldn't ignore. I watch Yumi from across our small barracks as she sits at the wooden desk, her brush hovering over the paper. The lamp casts shadows across her face, deepening the worry lines that have appeared there in recent weeks. She has been sitting there for almost an hour, starting and stopping, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with her sleeve. I understand her struggle all too well. Every day, we work alongside the Americans, treating their sick and wounded, and every day, it becomes harder to hold on to our hatred. The truth weighs heavily on both of us. I would affirm, these men are not the demons we were taught to fear. "Yumi-san," I say softly, moving to sit on my cot near her desk. "Perhaps you should rest. The letter can wait until morning." She shakes her head, her hand trembling slightly as she finally begins to write. "I must try to explain, Miyuki, but how can I tell them?" Her voice catches. "How can I tell my family that I am helping the very people they believe killed my brother?" I watch as tears splash onto the paper, smearing the careful characters she has drawn. My own heart aches with the same conflict. Just yesterday, I helped treat a young soldier who reminded me so much of my own cousin back home. He had the same gentle eyes, the same quiet determination. "What troubles me most," Yumi continues, setting down her brush, "is that I no longer feel like a traitor when I help them. Captain Harrison, Private Foster, they show us such kindness. They treat us with respect." She looks at me, her eyes filled with anguish. How can we continue to see them as enemies? I reach out and squeeze her hand. We were taught that Americans were savages, that they would torture and kill us if we were captured. But look at us now. We are safe, well-fed, treated with dignity. I pause, choosing my words carefully. Perhaps what we were taught was not the whole truth. Yumi nods slowly, turning back to her letter. I watch as she writes about her daily life in the camp, carefully avoiding mention of her work in the medical ward. Instead, she asks about home, about family members, about the cherry trees in her mother's garden. But between the lines, I can read her unspoken questions. How can I reconcile my duty to Japan with my growing understanding of our supposed enemies? How can I remain loyal to my country while following my conscience as a healer? Finally, she folds the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper as if trying to touch her family through the distance. "It feels like a betrayal," she whispers, not telling them everything. But how can I explain what I barely understand? Myself? I move to sit beside her at the desk. "You are still the same Yumi who left Japan. Honorable, compassionate, dedicated to helping others. That has not changed." I gesture toward the medical ward where we spend our days. What has changed is only our understanding of who deserves that compassion. She looks at me gratefully, but I can see the weight of her internal struggle hasn't lifted. Tomorrow, she will return to treating American soldiers, easing their pain, listening to their stories of home. And with each act of kindness, each moment of connection, the line between friend and enemy will blur further. For now, all we can do is wait. Wait for responses from home, wait for clarity in our confused hearts, wait for some sign that we are not lost in this strange territory between duty and humanity. I watch Yumi from across the barracks as she stares at the box of supplies in front of her. The American Red Cross packages arrived this morning, neat cardboard boxes filled with food, blankets, and medical supplies. Even from where I stand, I can see her hands trembling as she lifts out a bar of soap, turning it over in her hands like it's made of precious jade. "They're giving these to us?" she whispers, more to herself than anyone else. "But we're the enemy?" I finish for her, moving closer. My voice carries more bitterness than I intend. "That's what we're supposed to be, isn't it?" The other nurses gather around, their faces a mix of confusion and wonder as they examine the contents. There are bandages, antiseptic solutions, and even some basic medicines, things we desperately need in our medical work. But it's the personal items that seem to affect Yumi the most. Soft wool socks, clean underwear, even some chocolate bars. "Look at this," she says, holding up a small notebook with a pencil attached. They thought of everything. I feel my own resolve weakening as I watch her. We were taught that Americans were barbarians, cruel and merciless. Yet here we are, receiving gifts from their people who have never met us, who only know us as their nation's enemies. "It doesn't make sense," I mutter, picking up a warm sweater. The wool is soft against my calloused hands. "Why would they do this?" Yumi's eyes meet mine, and I see in them the same struggle I've been fighting. "Maybe," she says slowly, "maybe they see us as people first, Miyuki-san, not just prisoners." I watch as she moves to her bunk, pulling out paper and pen. Her movements are deliberate, almost reverent. "I need to write to my family," she says. "I need to tell them." "Tell them what?" I ask, though I already know. I've seen the change in her these past weeks, the way she looks at the American soldiers differently now, the way she speaks to them, tends to their wounds, listens to their stories. "The truth," she replies simply, "that everything we thought we knew." She pauses, struggling with the words. "That perhaps there is more to this world than what we were taught to believe." I sit beside her as she begins to write, her brush moving carefully across the paper. Through the window, I can see Captain Harrison supervising the distribution of more supplies to the male prisoners. His face shows no trace of superiority or disdain, only genuine concern for our welfare. "Do you think they'll understand?" Yumi asks softly, not looking up from her letter. "Our families?" I don't answer immediately. How can I, when I'm not sure I understand it myself? The kindness we've been shown here, from the medical supplies we use to treat their own soldiers, to these gifts from strangers, it defies everything we were raised to believe. "Write what's in your heart," I finally tell her, touching her shoulder gently. "That's all any of us can do now." She nods and continues writing, her brush strokes steady despite the emotion I can see in her face. I leave her to her thoughts, moving back to my own bunk where an unopened Red Cross package waits. My fingers trace the cross symbol on the box, and I feel tears threatening to fall. This gesture of humanity, this bridge across the divide of war, it's changing us all, whether we want it to or not. I watched Yumi from across the barracks as she sat on her cot, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The radio had just announced Emperor Hirohito's surrender speech. None of us could believe it. Japan, our proud nation, had surrendered. The war was over. "It cannot be true," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. But deep down, I knew it was. The Americans had been treating us differently these past few days, with a kind of gentle sympathy that made my stomach turn. Yumi's face showed no emotion, but I knew her well enough to see the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. We had been through so much together since our capture at Saipan. I remembered how she was the first to agree to help with the American patients, how her decision had slowly influenced the rest of us. "Miyuki-san," she said softly, using the honorific even though we had grown close. "Do you think we did the right thing, helping them?" I moved to sit beside her on the cot. Through the window, I could see American soldiers going about their duties, some celebrating the news. "I don't know," I admitted. But I know you saved lives. That has to count for something. Yumi nodded slowly. I keep thinking about all the ones we couldn't save. Both sides. So many dead. Her voice cracked slightly. Remember Sergeant Matthews? And Lieutenant Yamamoto back in Saipan? I did remember. The American sergeant who died despite Yumi's best efforts, and our own lieutenant who bled out in our field hospital. Both had called for their mothers in their final moments. Both had died the same way. Scared young men far from home. It's strange. Yumi continued. How they taught us the Americans were monsters. But Private Foster showed me pictures of his children. Captain Harrison brings us extra blankets. When the nights are cold, they're just people. I understood what she meant. Even I, who had resisted helping for so long, had come to see the humanity in our captors. The war made monsters of all of us, I said quietly. But perhaps it also showed us how to be human again. Through our window, we could see Captain Harrison approaching our barracks. His usual confident stride seemed heavier today. Yumi straightened her uniform instinctively, always the professional nurse. Even now. They'll send us home soon, I said, watching Harrison's approach. Back to a Japan that's different from the one we left. Yumi's hands tightened in her lap. Everything is different now, Miyuki-san. Including us. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. How do we go back? How do we explain to our families that our enemies showed us kindness? That we helped them? That we... She trailed off. That we learned to see them as human? I finished for her. Perhaps that is what we were supposed to learn from all this. Captain Harrison's footsteps echoed on the wooden steps outside. I watched Yumi compose herself, wiping away any trace of tears, but I could see the conflict in her eyes, the same conflict I felt in my own heart. We had come here as proud daughters of Japan, certain of our place in the world. We would leave as changed women, carrying a burden of understanding that few would comprehend. The door opened, and Harrison stepped in, his face solemn. We both stood, waiting to hear the words we knew would come, that soon we would be leaving Camp McCoy forever. I watched silently as Yumi gathers her few belongings from the barracks we've called home these past months. There's a heaviness in the air that even the morning sunlight streaming through the windows can't dispel. The war is over, but none of us feel like celebrating. We're going home to a changed Japan, and we ourselves are changed. Through the window, I observe Captain Harrison approaching our barracks. His stride is purposeful but unhurried, just as it's been every day since we arrived. I remember how I distrusted that calm demeanor at first, certain it masked some cruel intention. Now I know better. Yumi, I call softly to my friend. Captain Harrison is coming. She looks up from her small bundle, and I notice her hands trembling slightly. These Americans, especially the captain, have affected her deeply. I've watched her transformation from a distance, seeing how each act of kindness chipped away at her defenses. While I maintained my reserve, she opened her heart to them. The door opens, and Captain Harrison enters, removing his cap. Good morning, he says in that gentle way of his. The transport will be ready in an hour. I busy myself with my own packing, but I can't help overhearing their conversation. They speak quietly, their words heavy with meaning. I wanted to thank you personally, the captain says to Yumi. Your work here saved many lives. I only did what any nurse would do, Yumi responds, but I can hear the emotion in her voice. No, Harrison says firmly. You did much more than that. You showed courage when you chose to help us. Despite everything you'd been taught about Americans, you chose compassion over fear. I fold a uniform, pressing it perhaps more firmly than necessary. My own thoughts are jumbled. Memories of the sick soldiers we treated, the quiet conversations in the ward, the gradual realization that these men were not the monsters we'd been told they were. You've changed how I see the world, Yumi tells him. I never expected. She pauses, collecting herself. I never expected to find humanity in my enemy. We were never truly enemies, Harrison replies. Just people caught on opposite sides of something much bigger than ourselves. The truth of his words strikes me. I think of all the wounded men I've treated, both Japanese and American. In their pain, in their fears, in their longing for home, they were all the same. A bell sounds in the distance, signaling the approaching departure time. Captain Harrison straightens, replacing his cap. It's time, he says simply. I watch as Yumi bows deeply to him, a gesture of genuine respect. The captain returns the bow, somewhat awkwardly, but with sincerity. When he leaves, I move to Yumi's side and place a hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" I ask softly. She nods, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I don't think I'll ever be the same," she whispers. "None of us will be," I reply, surprising myself with the admission. Perhaps that's not such a bad thing. We gather our belongings and join the other nurses outside. The morning air is crisp, and the camp is eerily quiet, except for the sound of the transport plane's engines warming up. American soldiers line the path to the airfield, standing at attention, a final show of respect that would have been unthinkable months ago. I keep my eyes forward as we walk, but I can feel Yumi taking in every detail, every face. She's carrying something precious home with her, not just memories but a transformed heart. And though I may not show it as openly, I realize I am too. I watched Yumi step off the transport plane onto Japanese soil, her shoulders straight despite the weight of everything we'd been through. Her family rushed forward to embrace her, tears streaming down their faces. Standing a few steps behind, I noticed how different she looked from the nurse I'd known at Camp McCoy. There was a newfound peace in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Miyuki-san," she called to me, waving me over to meet her family. As I bowed to them, I could see the same fierce pride in their eyes that we'd all carried before our capture. But Yumi's gaze held something more now, a wisdom that came from seeing beyond the boundaries we'd been taught. Later that evening, as we sat in her family's garden, Yumi confided in me. "I feel so different now," she said quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of green tea. "When I look at our homeland, I see it with new eyes." I understood what she meant. The American soldiers at Camp McCoy had shattered everything we thought we knew about our enemies. "You helped save many lives," I reminded her, thinking of the countless hours she'd spent tending to sick and injured soldiers. "That's what troubles me sometimes," Yumi admitted. "I feel proud of the work we did, but then I remember how our countrymen suffered. How can I reconcile these feelings?" I watched her struggle with this internal conflict, one I knew well myself. "Perhaps," I suggested, "it's not about choosing between pride and guilt. Maybe it's about accepting that both can exist together." Yumi nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "Captain Harrison once told me that compassion knows no borders. I didn't understand then, but I do now." She turned to look at the cherry trees, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. "Our experiences at Camp McCoy taught me that humanity exists even in those we're taught to hate. You were braver than most of us," I told her. "You were the first to step forward when they needed help." She smiled sadly. "Not brave, just unable to ignore what I was seeing. The Americans weren't the monsters we'd been told they were. They were fathers, sons, brothers, just like our own soldiers." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Yumi stood and walked to the garden's edge, where she could see the city spreading out below us. I joined her there, understanding that we were both changed women now. "Do you regret it?" I asked softly. "Helping them?" "No," she replied without hesitation. "That's what surprises me most. Every life we saved was precious, regardless of which flag they fought under. That's what I learned at Camp McCoy, that kindness transcends nationality." As we stood there, watching darkness settle over our homeland, I could see the transformation in my friend complete itself. The rigid nurse who had once seen everything in black and white was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood the complex shades of gray that colored our world. "Japan will heal," Yumi said quietly. "And so will we all. But we must remember what we learned, that our enemies are human too, capable of both cruelty and kindness, just like us." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.